It's lovely to be back here at Sheraton. I think the last time I actually preached here was probably more than 5 years ago. It was probably during the time that there was the interregnum between Peter Williams leaving and then, of course, Glyn Austin coming as your cleric here in this community. It seems a long time. It is. A lot has happened. But also for yourselves here in this particular church, I know you've had great struggles, especially after all the floodwater here. And you seem to have really restored this church. And I know I came here once with the Archdeacon during the time that things weren't looking too grand here. And I'm just amazed at the work that's been done in restoring this place of worship back to what it is, an historic landmark. Although I hear you also call this the Cathedral of Gower as well, placed in its setting where it is here amongst the people of Gower. A lot has indeed happened since then, but I just want to go back a little bit, perhaps a little bit further than my encounters with you as ministry area leader over the years. And that was initially to knowing the Gower as a lad growing up on the east side. I saw it at a distance. To me, it was a place of beaches. It was a place where people had holidays. I remember coming for a caravan holiday with an auntie and uncle down to Oxford. I remember as a child coming down to some of the nearer beaches, like, of course, Langland and Caswell. But I didn't really know the north of Gower. And it wasn't until I came back here as a cleric in 2011, firstly to Three Cliffs and, of course, then the other roles, that I began to realise that there was a significant change in the landscape as you moved from south to north. There is a difference in all these places, whether it's to do with community, whether it's to do with the history of these places, and so on. But it's not unique. As I've travelled throughout the diocese over the years, I realise that there is this identity, this sense of presence and place wherever you go. Not a uniqueness, because there's so much that you share with others as well, but certainly that sense of place and presence that inhabits the landscape in which we live. How do you draw that together? How do you make what can be in some ways a scattering of communities and villages, and more importantly churches? How do you draw that together and give them an identity? Well, you can give them a title. Yes, that gives them an identity. But in a sense, there's a danger in making everything sort of like monochrome, that you lose the individual identity of the individual places, of the individual communities, and of the people as well. And my role as Archdeacon in his ministry areas, in a way, I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute, is not about making everything one, although there is a sense how we draw together administratively, but I'll put that to one side. But how do you maintain the uniqueness of the flavour of worship and community that you have in places? That uniqueness that actually makes people drive past one church to go to another church. And that's not unusual. I know there are people who drive past my front door in St Mary's Pennard, not because they don't like me, I don't know, they may not like me, but because they like to go to the choral tradition down in Oystermouth. And that's fine. They go somewhere. There is a place in the community for people to worship. But one of the roles I think that certainly being a ministry area archdeacon is about is seeing the strengths that each community has. Now, I'm fortunate here. I know the strength that you have as a community. I know the things that draw and bind you together, not just the church, but all the things that go on in the village as well. The shop, the open gardens, all the things that make you who you are. And if communities have those strengths, then there's the basis for which the church can play a very important role. I'm so grateful for the work done by Glyn Austin in the time he was here, in drawing the community together, in being very much part of your lives here, both in Sheraton and Llanmadog. That point, and then of course in Llangennith as well, that point of contact, that person that you knew, very identifiable in your community. And that work continues with Tim and Nigel and yourselves. You have not a blueprint, but you have a way of being church here that is individual to you and is different to other places. But that's no different throughout Gower and throughout the diocese as well. All places have that uniqueness which they cherish and celebrate. And times change. Things happen. Since then, we've all been through the nightmare that was COVID. In some ways, we were blessed on Gower because, in a way, we had these wonderful places that we lived in and that we certainly could find some respite from all that was going on in the world around us. Although it still touched us, we still lost people. And I certainly, for myself, lost my daughter-in-law's mum, and that was quite a tragic thing to happen in our family. It brought home to us the reality of the closeness of that time for so many families. Indeed, the only places I was going out of the vicarage at Penard was to the food bank and sadly to the crematorium. And so as we sort of now come out of that time, as we sort of try and work out once more where we stand in our communities and the message we proclaim, there is perhaps a time to review and to refresh ourselves and say, okay, it's not gone yet, it's still there, the memory is still there, and sadly COVID is still there. But how are we going to be church now, in the present time, and in the future? Talking to people saying, well, not everybody's come back, we've lost some people, people have got out of the habit. And that is similar to what's been told me right across the diocese. We have had people who have stayed away, we've had people who've got out of the habit, and sadly in some churches also loss of life through either COVID or other health reasons besides. What we're starting to see across the diocese is, yes, some church communities are starting to grow again and get back to their former strength, but others are struggling. And that was expected, I think, when you have such a national pandemic that does sort of sweep across communities. But we look forward. My role as Archdeacon to ministry areas is something that I certainly wasn't expecting at this stage of my ministry. I was reminded as I came through the door that this was to be my retirement year. And that was always the plan. I would go at 68, sail off into the sunset, make model aeroplanes, and just happily see out my retirement. Wonderful. And then I had a phone call. And you always know when the bishop rings you up and says about lunchtime on I think it was a Thursday, are you sitting down? I like that bit, are you sitting down? So I duly sat down, because when a bishop tells you to sit, you do it, and you're very obedient. And he said, I want to make you an archdeacon for ministry areas, for the formation of ministry areas. And I have to say that really shocked me, because that wasn't what I was expecting at this stage of my ministry. So I said, well, look, I can't answer yes or no, but I need to go and have a chat with my wife. And he said, yeah, go and have a chat with Andrea. Gentlemen, we all know if we're sensible, if we ask something like that, we go and ask the wife. Because, yeah, you know what I mean? So anyway, I went to the kitchen. Andrea was preparing lunch. She did have a knife in her hand, so I was very careful. I'm joking. She said, who is that? And I said, it was the bishop. And of course, we've had enough phone calls from the bishops over the years that she said, what did he want? I went, here we go, what did he want? I said, he wants to make me an archdeacon. And if I'd had a camera at that moment, I'd have loved to have taken a picture of her face. It was a real picture. And then she thought about it and she said, well, you may as well say yes, because I don't see much of you anyway. So I said yes. There is no other archdeacon in the province of the Church in Wales specifically responsible for ministry areas and their formation. The role has been created here with money that was given by the representative body to let the Diocese of Swansea and Brecon in many ways catch up with what's already been successfully done in other dioceses, such as St Asaph, where our current Bishop John Lomas has come from, where he served as an archdeacon himself. The biggest question that I've been asked so far, I've been doing this work since about the 1st of November. The biggest question I've been asked so far in visiting groups of clergy and parishes and PCCs and preaching on a Sunday is, will it make a difference to us? What is the most noticeable change that we will see? My own parish of Three Cliffs, the most noticeable change that they're seeing is that my time as a parish priest has very much diminished. I'm still their vicar, I'm still a parish priest there, because one of the things about taking on this role is that I still wanted to have a parochial ministry, to be grounded in what I was always called to do, to be a pastor, to be that person at the sharp end of ministry, not, a bureaucrat, somebody in the hierarchy of the church just doing the rounds and doing the things and saying the things that people wanted or perhaps not wanted to hear. To me, it had to be a parochial ministry based in the reality of parish life. So a third of the time, or a quarter of the time, whichever way it works most weeks, I'm still in the parish. So yes, Three Cliffs now find that 2 Sundays a month I'm not there, I'm actually out in other communities. And a lot of my time during the week is spent talking to groups and dealing with the sort of like the formation of ministry areas, the administration behind all of that in conjunction with the office in Brecon. But people say, well, what will I notice different on the ground? What will I see different on the ground? And I have to say, for somewhere like here, probably very little. Sunday by Sunday, you will still have your active worship. You will still have your tea and coffee at the end of the service. You will still gather together. The worship will be the same. Tim and Nigel will still share the services with you. So in that sense, on the ground, you will probably see very little, if any, change whatsoever. For the people in the villages and in the communities that we serve, it doesn't make a difference at all. We are still the parish church in the community where that community has always had a parish church, with the priest, with the vicar. In a sense, a vicar in the ministry area, but certainly the person appointed to care for the churches in a particular geographical area within the ministry area. The structures change, yes, but in a sense, you've already changed your structures over the years quite radically. When I first came to Gower in 2011, there were 6 stipendiary posts. There was the same number of churches, but many of them had individual PCCs. Over the years, the stipendiary posts in clerics has reduced. You now have, currently on Gower, 2 stipends, but a third one to be appointed to South West Gower, and of course with Calais and Coch coming into the Gower ministry area, another stipend to be appointed there. And we have had expressions of interest, and that process is moving on quite rapidly. As a structure, you have changed, the diocese has changed. We've moved into bigger units, we've moved into benefices, where churches have been joined together with a single benefice council, with a single structure, but with church councils having their own ability to look after their building, their finances, and so on. Where ministry areas have been formally commissioned in other dioceses, they've adopted the benefice model, so that it's very similar to where we are at the moment in our diocese here. There will be a ministry area council, which in a sense is the benefice legal PCC. But each of the churches within that will still be looking to their own building, their own mission, and their own finances, and their own structures within that particular church, whether that's done formally or informally. The good news is that the ministry area council takes on a lot of the responsibility that sometimes does burden us. There will be a paid administration role, which we have funding from the representative body of the Church in Wales, whereby each ministry area will have an administrator who will take on the roles of health and safety, who will look at the faculties, who will work with the Buildings and Grounds Committee, who will indeed be the girl on Mount Friday for us clergy. And for the clergy who love administration, well, for some of them, they're going to have to give that up and actually get out and see people. For those who hate administration, they're going to really love it. But what it means is that across the ministry area, a lot of the tasks that sometimes bog us down as church councils, a lot of the tasks that sometimes take up the time of clergy, when in reality that's not our role, will be centralised to an administrator and looked after by the ministry area council. For us clergy, I think it's freeing, because when Tim was ordained and I was ordained, nowhere in the ordinal that we answered to at our ordination did it say anything about structure and administration and bureaucracy and all those things which somehow just seem to get piled layer upon layer upon layer over the years on our ministries. To me, when I was ordained in 1999, out of the parish of Llansamlet, it was about being that person, that presence in the community, the visitor, the pastor, the vicar, the priest, that person who was in the schools, that person who was in the hospitals, that person who was free and able to do the things, the calling of ministry. And that's what we want to do for both lay and ordained people. We want to free them of the burden of bureaucracy and administration and put them in a position whereby they can minister within their communities. And that, I think, is something the church has sadly lost over a number of years. That ability once more to have the clergy, regardless of the numbers, and I know numbers have shrunk, and that, is a cost implication across all dioceses now. I know numbers have shrunk, but we are looking at ways of releasing the clergy back into their communities so they can be there for people to see and to engage with and encounter. And I think when people engage and encounter with the people of God's church, that's when they actually find it's easy to actually become part, or easier to become part of that worshipping community. And so there's a lot happening, and there's a lot still yet to happen. The bishop has said that by Ascension or Pentecost, we will be licensed ministry area within the Diocese of Swansea and Brecon, but we just never had the legal structure. It's always still been just the parish or benefit structure, which we've worked to. Our new bishop has come in and now wants to change that and takes that to the next stage. So part of my role, in a sense, as Archdeacon for ministry areas, as well as working out how we get from A to B and working with the diocese regarding things like charitable status and financial implications and finance and accounting. It's really exciting stuff, I know for certain. But it's also working out on the ground how that works practically for the communities in both the north and the south of the diocese. Because my role isn't just Gower based, it's throughout the diocese, right up in the north, right down here to the south. Next Sunday, I'm in Holy Trinity Llandrindod Wells, doing something similar like this again, and then obviously taking some questions and answers at the end. This week in the bulletin, and I don't know how many of you get the diocesan bulletin, but I think Tim's going to make it available also through the newsletter, and there has been a letter sent out to those of you on the various PCCs. There are a lot of questions that have been asked so far about how this is going to work. And what I've tried to do is put a digest together of all the answers I've been able to give. And this week the bishop announced some further things as well with regards to how ministry areas are going to be taken forward, the financing of ministry areas, the structures, and things that will be available in the future to help us move forward. So there's a lot of information out there. And one thing I have found over the years is sometimes we don't always get the communication right. Sometimes people don't know what's going on. And so it becomes a game of Chinese whispers. It's amazing sometimes when you go to parishes and they tell you the things they've heard, and you can almost pinpoint where it's come from. Because we are very good at sometimes assuming what's going on, but I think we need to get all the facts, because then once we've got the facts, we can ask the right questions and hopefully get the right answers. And part of my role in that sense is getting the right answers to you as a church. And if anything I said or anything that you've read, you'll be reading now coming up over the next week or so regarding the formation of ministry areas, the biggest invitation I can give you is to get in touch with me and ask the questions. Don't let it run, don't let it ride. Ask the questions which are critically important to you as a church, as a grouping, as a gathering here, as a community, and also as an individual. Because I think my granddaughter summed this up wonderfully for me. She gave me a little pink elephant. The thing about Anxious the elephant, of course, is the fact that anxious is anxious. And we all can be anxious sometimes. But the other thing also about anxious is that he's an elephant. And Anxious the elephant is the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is always the question that we wished we'd asked, but never quite got round to asking. And it's always the question that after the meeting's over, you ask others about in the car park, but not actually in the meeting itself. And so, before we go today, this morning, before I shut up, and I will shut up in a few minutes, if there are any sort of really burning questions, I'd like you to ask me them now. If there's anything at the end, obviously I'll be staying behind for a cup of coffee, ask me then. But if there's anything really that you need to mull over, pray over and think about, then please, please, please do get in touch with me. My contact details are the same as they were before. You can easily find me online, but also Tim has got my contact details as well. And that's, it's about conversations. It's about providing the information. It's about being able, as we go forward, to have a discussion about the individual things that affect the individual churches. Because whilst the ministry area is this sort of administrative construct which spreads from Swansea West right over to the tip of Gower, in essence, it's about empowering. It's about making sure that the parishes, we're no longer parishes, the churches in that ministry area are sustained and supported, receive ministry, that they have a place and a presence in the community where they've always been, and God willing, always will be as well. So I didn't go for an hour, Tim.
No, well done.
So, are there any urgent burning questions before we move on? Barry.
3 concerns, and I don't expect answers, okay?
Right.
The one we're going to address will be when we become Gower benefice. And I welcome the benefice. We've gone to North Gower benefice, I think, quite seriously, territories, and it's a good thing it just brought a number of us out of our own churches into other people's churches. And I was saying earlier, I said, I've got a lot more friends now than I did before COVID and all the things. So, but the 3 concerns are, we have to discuss parish share.
Yes.
That'll be the other one is going to be incumbents, which is you addressed as well. And the other one is going to be sort of some churches are really going to run out of funds in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
But I don't expect answers now, but it's something.
Let me just touch on 3 things quickly. Parish share, we've received a figure, but there's a bit of a technicality in that, and we will be sending out some information very shortly this week. Because of course, now instead of being paid by the diocese, I'm paid by the RB. So there's a bit of a technicality that we have to work out with me still being incumbent also in Three Cliffs. But I hope to put a smile on the face of the treasurers sometime in the next couple of days. Catherine, I believe you are the treasurer for the North End entirely.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my question.
Yeah.
Is that Gower setup?
The Google setup will finish the benefice and it will become part of the greater ministry area. Now, obviously, at this stage, you are the treasurer for Gower, so I do need to speak to you, or I will email you this next coming week, as there will be the other benefice treasurers with some initial figures that Peter Townsend's worked out. And then we can have a discussion at some stage. He would have called a meeting before now, but unfortunately he's been in hospital. But I'll have a chat with you at the end there about some of the implications. Clergy, yes, still Tim, still Nigel, name on the door, there'll still be the people ministering to you. Because although the clergy will be vicars in the ministry areas, they will actually still be allocated churches to have. Barry, I quite agree. The diocese has never been a rich diocese, okay? Since disestablishment, Llandaff had historic incomes, St David's had historic incomes, Swansea and Brecon, because it was sort of cut out of the two, never had that historic income. So we've never had the fallback for paying the parish share. The clergy stipends have always been paid from the giving of the people, okay? And that is a problem because in some places churches have gone into their reserves. So that's acknowledged as a problem. New posts that are being created now to serve in places where we've almost withdrawn from are actually being paid for from money which has been released by the representative body. So if we are employing more clergy, which we hope to do so over the next couple of years, then that will not be done out of the pockets of the people already looking to pay the parish share here in the churches. Okay. Is that?
It's also, when the benefice was mooted, there was a lot of stern faces really, and we just moved seamlessly really sort of into the benefice and the way we work really. So PCC means there are more people from other churches sitting in the PCC.
The Benefits Council will be elected this year, though also the Ministerial Council will be elected this year, and there will be representation from each of the churches on that. But you'll still have your individual church councils.
Okay,
That's
right.
in the matter. Okay.
So do you think, Peter, that, I've said this earlier, but just so faculty approval, which we all struggle with desperately, will our new administrator be able to do all our faculty approvals, do you think?
We will be training our administrator in faculty, in the use of faculties, believe you me, online faculties, in conjunction with the buildings and grants.
Yes.
It's interesting. I know of one ministry area who already employs an administrator, and they've come to recognise over the last 5 or 6 years they just couldn't manage without her.
Yes, because I think, we're all getting older, and, sometimes we just can't cope with all the paperwork.
Yeah.
As a congregation,
That's right.
Because we're just not able to.
Well, this is why our Bishop went to the RB and got
Yeah.
funding for administrators, because we realised where they've done it elsewhere, it works, and it takes away from the congregation the things that actually, really, in reality, the congregation shouldn't be doing.
Yes, and it's also helpful for us personally here.
Yeah.
We have 2 churches,
Yes.
one congregation that deals with 2 churches,
Yeah.
and that is
It's a bit like
impossible.
Maine and Nicholston.
Yeah, it's impossible, to fund it really. So we will need help with that, I think, or we have to mothball one. I don't know which way we go.
Well, that is something, again, with church closure or church mothballing, that's something for the local congregation to decide. There's no imposition of that from above. Okay, but certainly one of the first things we'll be showing our administrator will be, this is how you do a faculty. But there will be help for them again to understand that. There'll be full training for the administrators as well.
So if we want to do something to the building that
Yes.
needs faculty approval, we would go to the
First of all,
buildings group?
you've Buildings and Grants Group, I will get the administrator to work closely with
With
them.
Nigel, yeah, okay.
Okay,
Thank you, yeah.
lovely.
So we have a phenomenon on the 5th Sunday,
Yes,
when the 5th Sunday happens, which isn't everyone.
4 Sundays a year.
We all come together, don't we?
Yeah.
One of the 6 churches in Gower.
Yeah.
Will that continue to happen?
That's up to you. Patterns of worship are not to be imposed. Patterns of worship are to be discussed to see what works best. Now, a lot depend on clergy numbers, because at the moment we are very, very, very thin on the ground. We have vacancy in South West Gower and Clare to Cope. And I'm out on the picture 2 Sundays a month anyway. But that's up to you. I think there does need to be an element of coming together and worshipping together. Otherwise, you'll never get to know your neighbours, who they are, etc. Now, Mumble's ministry area, next Sunday, there's no worship in any of the churches except in All Saints Oyster. So they're going to bring the churches together there. But people are starting to get to know who their neighbours are. Who are the people? They haven't got 2 heads and that sort of thing. Now, sometimes it's not always convenient, I realise. Most of us are like fine wines, we don't travel very far. But there is that sense also of worshipping in numbers as well, of coming together, greater numbers, greater encouragement. And I've often found that, especially in rural areas. I know there's a bit of distance to travel. But, when you come to, if you've got a congregation, I can think of a few churches where there's about 3 or 4 on a Sunday, but suddenly every so often they are together with a whole host of people. It's encouraging for them as well. And I'm hoping that that's something which either, you work out for yourselves, or in this case in Gower, what I've said, as I've said to other potential ministry area councils as well, is there needs to be a discussion on the pattern of worship, not a reduction of the pattern of worship, but how can that be sustained going forwards, either with lay worship leaders, of which I know you are one, and the clergy sharing that thing together. I think we're getting more realistic about that as time goes by.
But could we meet up with South Gower as well occasionally, do you think?
In what sense?
Well, for worship.
Yeah.
I feel that we have this north-south divide tremendously, and I think it's really, because we're just Christians on Gower.
There will be an inauguration service for the whole ministry area in a church somewhere on Gower, okay, north and south, all right, and at that service, the bishop will come and inaugurate and commission the ministry area. And I hope that sets a precedent then for moving forward.
Yeah.
It hasn't been easy over the last couple of years with vacancies and COVID, and we have got out of the habit of a lot of the things that we used to. I think we just got to find that habit again and try and see which ways we can do it.
Yeah.
You've got this ministry area, PCC, so we'll do it with
Yeah.
PCC. We'll have our individual church committees
Yes.
that will feed up to this ministerial. That's going to be quite big, isn't it?
It can be, well, in Gower, it'll probably be a representative from each church.
Yeah.
There's nothing to stop the churches who have always supported one another still in some way supporting one another. Like obviously here it's a no-brainer. You've got two churches which have always worked closely together. Now it might be here, for example, you'd have one representative. You wouldn't, because you've got one congregation. Penmain and Nicholston would be another example I'd use, Captain. They one congregation, they would have one representative. It's not so much the size, I think, sometimes, although I have seen some bodies which can be a bit too big. It's more about how they interact, how they work together. And I think, again, I would say that takes time to work out. But certainly initially, my idea would be that, and I think, I've had arguments either way. Some bigger churches said, well, when you're a bigger church, you should have more representation. But my argument is, you are all equal in the kingdom of God, therefore you should all have equal representation at the table, regardless of the size of the church. So that everybody feels they have a voice at the centre.
I think it's not my concern, but where I can see the potential for issues is if the gap between the individual who attends the service on Sunday and the decision making is...
I think there's got to be good communication. I think whatever goes on at church level and ministerial level must be communicated both ways.
So what mechanisms do you envisage?
I hope that we'll be able to use the ministerial website, I hope we'll be able to use the bulletin, and all sort of anything that's communication, so that nobody feels left behind and left out. And that to me is important. And I'm finding this wherever I go, north or south, people are saying, we need to know more, we need to know better. And I think it'll be up to we're fortunate here because we've got the ministerial website. And what really started to draw that together in some ways was the pilgrimage last summer. People started to share more of the information with one another. But that's something we will always try and improve on. And I thank you for that one. Peter?
Just develop collaboration in this, as we're in the middle of the week of prayer for Christian unity. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering what the ecumenical dimensions of the ministry area are, because I'm aware that both Chapel and Roman Catholic probably have got worse manpower and financial problems than we have.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering what the sharing there might be.
I think as we've always tried to do in Gower is be open to one another, meet together when we can, share whatever services when we can. Because of the difference in structures and in some cases difference in theologies as well that you find in the different churches and chapels. There are always some obstacles to overcome. But I think in the first instance we will continue to develop and work with our partners. We've already been told this year again we're going to do the ecumenical stable trail in Reynolds, and that's something which is going to take place. So obviously wherever we can, wherever there's an openness and a willingness, we will share with our brothers and sisters. And it was actually built into the original constitution of ministry areas some time ago. In fact, I think it was in the Church of Wales review about ministry areas. How could we and how should we still operate in local ecumenical links? Well, because I think on the ground, as I said, on the face of it, very little will change. Whatever links we've got going on should still be maintained and developed further.
We always had, or we had a PCC.
Yes.
Now, in the new organisation, that PCC disappears.
The PCC in type, we will still have a church council, which will still look after the day-to-day running of your churches. Because I think there's the sense of the local, but the gathered as well. So as well as the ministerial council, which will be the legal benefits for the whole of the Gower, the churches will still have their local church council, which will still deal with their local finances, their buildings and their mission, and the local issues that you deal with on a week-to-week basis. And that's the sense of maintaining the local within a bigger structure.
So on that point of the buildings, so have we got, as the council, church council, have we got any legal responsibility for the building then?
The Ministerial Council overall is the legal entity that the
Right,
body
so
of trust.
we lose our, we're not responsible. That's
Well,
not the right word.
yeah, but you're still part of the greater whole, so therefore, to a certain extent, you have that shared responsibility. You wouldn't, as a congregation, let it go to the dogs.
Yeah, so health and safety issues and things, but we would talk to the ministry
Yeah.
area.
And what we're hoping is that in
council.
some other places, the health and safety inspections are done centrally for the churches, rather than somebody being, in collaboration.
So we
with
don't need an
others.
individual health and safety within our council.
You
particularly
could
to do
have,
it
if you wanted
ourselves.
to. It depends how you wish to form your church council. One ministry area knows their administrator actually does all the health and safety inspections. That works for them, but that's taking a bit of time to develop. Okay, so I think there's always a sense of collaboration on that.
What is the feeling about the quinquennial inspections? Is that something that will go up to the administrative level?
Quinquennial inspections, we've got a slight change of that. They still be inspected every 5 years. Okay, we're about to do away with the old system. The old system was one year and 5 years later another different one. They might tell you something totally different. So from April, out of all the money that we've been able to save from not having these individual inspectors, we are employing as a diocese, as they have done elsewhere, a churches inspector who will do all the quinquennials, but it will also be there to assist churches locally and the Ministerial Council, and in this case the Buildings and Grants Committee, looking realistically at the building, what they need to do, and with the diocese providing help and advice, which you would have had to pay for before with the old system.
Will he be paid?
He will be fully employed by the diocese.